Every now and then the sports world will witness other athletes that have tried their luck in the squared circle. Today we are going to cover the boxing career of Ed Too Tall Jones. I find this guy's journey into the sport very interesting. Edward Jones was born in Jackson, Tennessee. What I find even more interesting is that Jones only played 3 high school football games because his school did not have a football team until his senior year. However, he did participate in baseball and basketball. He was very good at both sports. After high school, there was even some offers made from Major League Baseball teams. But basketball was the sport where Jones really stood out. That's not hard to believe considering Jones was 6'9". When Jones was in his senior year, he started an amateur boxing career. He fought one time, knocking his opponent out in less than a minute. Jones was a top-notch athlete and had a choice to pursue a pro career in 4 sports: baseball, football, basketball, and boxing. Shortly after Jones' boxing match, his high school basketball coach read about his fight in a local newspaper and asked Jones to pick between boxing and basketball. Rumor has it the coach told Jones, if you pursue a boxing career, then there is no room for him on the basketball team. Jones would choose to pursue the hoop dreams, and the All-American basketball star would end up at Tennessee State University. Having an athlete like Jones on campus, the football program would become interested in Jones trying football. Remember, Jones only participated in 3 high school football games. Jones would focus fully on football after his sophomore year and placed basketball behind him. Jones didn't have experience but was a natural on the football field. It was at his very first football practice he was dubbed Too Tall Jones after a teammate made fun of him. You see, they didn't have a uniform long enough for the 6'9" Jones, and a teammate told him that he was too tall to play football. It was at Tennessee State University that Too Tall Jones became a 2-time All-American defensive lineman. With Jones leading the defense, Tennessee State will win the Black College Football National Championship in 1971 and in 1973. He would be drafted first by the Dallas Cowboys in the 1974 NFL Draft. This was the highest a football player from a historically black university had ever been drafted. Jones would play 5 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys and then pursue a boxing career. He would help the Cowboys win the Super Bowl in 1978. Jones was a big-time football player. When he decided to box, CBS would pick Jones up right away. The year was 1979. Jones was now 28 years old. Even though he would begin his pro boxing career in November of 1979, Jones appeared to be on the fast track as he would fight 4 times in 2 months. Jones also inspired another football player to give boxing a try. That would be retired Pittsburgh Steeler Ernie Holmes. Because there was a lot of media buzz surrounding Jones and Holmes had some boxing experience, he called out Too Tall Jones before Jones' debut. Ernie Holmes said that he had decided to become a fighter due to the retirement of Ali. But there was another Holmes now making a statement in the world of boxing. That would be Larry Holmes. I'm not sure if Too Tall Jones and Ernie Holmes was fully aware of how talented the new WBC heavyweight champion of the world was. Too Tall Jones did indeed have an idea. Maybe the target was the new WBA heavyweight champion, Big John Tate. When WBC world champion Larry Holmes heard Too Tall Jones was coming to boxing, Holmes said right away that he would like to fight Jones and said that he would give Jones a shot just based off his name alone. Jones responded and said that he was not ready for a shot against Larry Holmes and that he would have to work towards a fight with the WBC heavyweight champion. According to the newspapers, Jones will receive the highest purse for a boxing debut ever, receiving $45,000 guaranteed along with an extra $27,000 to $30,000 from CBS. This was more money for his pro debut than 1976 boxing Olympic star Sugar Ray Leonard received for his pro debut. Many believe that this was a gimmick from the top-rated Cowboys star to get more money out of the Cowboys. Jones' former teammates would miss Jones, but wish him the best. Jones assured sports fans that this was a dream that he had wanted to fulfill since he was a child. He would drop over 20 pounds of solid muscle right away. By the time he got through this cycle, he would have dropped 30 pounds of solid muscle, but he admitted that training for boxing was very difficult and that preparing one's body for a fight is different than preparing one's body to play football. His first opponent would be a fighter named Abraham Menaces. Jones' opponent Menaces had already had 11 fights and would receive $3,000. On November 2nd, 1979, Jones spoke to the media. He informed the media that he was not your average big man. He spoke of his speed and ability to maneuver around the ring and reminded the media that he was a pure athlete. The 28-year-old was no doubt a gifted athlete, but was he cut out for boxing? He told the media that boxing has always been number one for him and that football was second to boxing in his world. Jones again reminded the media that Larry Holmes had offered him a shot at the WBC Heavyweight Championship. So if he wanted to do this to earn some quick cash, he could have went straight to the top. By 1979, it had been 9 years since Jones had laced up and entered the ring. He wanted to work slowly towards a championship shot. Jones again informed the media that training for boxing was much harder than training for football. He was running 6 miles daily, 6 days of the week. Then he was in the boxing gym for hours daily. He had weighed around 276 for his last pro football game, but he was now weighing around 250. His opponent Menaces was not small. He was listed at 6'2". He was also a young fighter in his early 20s. He said that he had fought bigger guys than himself before and had knocked out bigger guys. November 2nd, 1979, the two fighters met for the weigh-in. Boxing must have really been Jones' first love because Jones compared his pro debut to his first Super Bowl appearance in regards to his built-up nervous energy. Jones weighed in at 255, Menaces weighed in at 204. Though Menaces is listed in the 6'2" to 6'3" range, the 6'9" too-tall Jones would tower over him at the weigh-in. Before the fight, Jones would tell the media that he did not miss football and that he would never return to the NFL. There was also some complaints coming from Team Menaces as the media announced Jones could earn as much as $72,000 and Menaces would only get $3,000. Team Menaces wanted Jones to take some additional money out of his purse and give it to Menaces for taking the fight. That was not going to happen, and Menaces was told to take the $3,000 or another opponent would have to be found. Menaces decided to take the $3,000. There were some comparisons made in a few articles between Jones and 1930s heavyweight champion Primo Carnero. Team Jones assured the fight fans that Jones was a bigger, more talented fighter than the former heavyweight champion from nearly 50 years earlier. On November 3rd, 1979, Ed Too Tall Jones and Menaces will finally square off. The fight was scheduled for 6 rounds. Jones predicted that the fight would not go 3 rounds. Because this was a heavyweight bout, the weigh-in was held the day before the fight. Ed Too Tall Jones made his bold prediction and appeared to be ready for war. He told the media that he does not plan on returning to the NFL. He compared his pro debut to making a Super Bowl appearance. He said that his plan was to fight often over the next 2 years before starting to fight contenders. One group of fans that was going to be wishing Jones the best was the 1979 Dallas Cowboys. They missed Jones but were supportive of his decision to pursue a career in boxing. Unfortunately, they would miss Jones' debut fight as they would be taking a trip to New York to play the Giants. The Cowboys was told that they would have a videotape available for them to watch Jones fight in his pro debut when they arrived at their destination. Although there was a TV contract in place, these fights are not easy to find. And during the time Too Tall Jones was attempting to box is when something life-changing happened to Jones. We will get into that shortly. Jones' debut fight against Menaces would take place in New Mexico. Jones will win a controversial majority decision. According to the media of that time period, Jones did not look good in his first fight. Criticisms was hot off the press. In the first 3 rounds, Jones fought off his jab. In the 4th round, Menaces started to utilize some head movement and landed some good shots to the body of Jones. In the 5th round, Menaces started to taunt Jones, fighting with his hands down and offering his chin to Jones. In the 6th round, this was the final round, Menaces would actually floor Jones. However, Jones would still win the decision. Jones did not feel the knockdown was legit and felt that he was pushed by Menaces. After the close decision victory, Jones told the media that he does not miss football and that his plan was to get some work and experience and perhaps get a title shot in a few years. He admitted that he was embarrassed by the performance. November 13, 1979, 10 days after his pro debut, Ed Too Tall Jones was back in the ring. This time, he would be facing a fighter named Lee Holloman. Holloman was a fighter from Dallas, Texas that had a record of 1-15-2. Holloman had been knocked out multiple times, and there was no doubt about it. Team Jones was looking for an opponent that Jones could knock out. They needed a knockout after Jones' disappointing decision win 10 days earlier. Jones told the media that he felt relaxed going into this fight. He told the media that this fight he was going to win by knockout. Lee Holloman was now going by the name Abdullah Muhammad. He was a big guy himself, but Jones would still have a major height and reach advantage. Ed Too Tall Jones would stop Muhammad in the 6th round because Muhammad's trainer would throw the towel in at the beginning of round 6. According to the trainer, there was a large amount of blood coming from Muhammad's eye. Jones was said to look very sloppy in this fight. Jones would throw awkward, slow punches and did not land many of the punches he threw. He was said to look clumsy in the ring, and after the fight, the fans would loudly boo Jones. Back in Dallas, there was now politicians and business owners challenging Jones to a boxing match. Of course, this was just talk, but the Dallas Cowboy fans were saying that Jones needed to give up boxing and come back to the doomsday defense, as the Dallas Cowboys sure could use his help. They were going through some injuries on the defensive side of the ball. There was a demand for Too Tall Jones, but that demand was coming from the NFL football fans that wanted to see him return to the football field. Jones' dream of a title shot seemed to be coming to an end, but a determined Jones would continue his journey as a professional fighter. He told the media that the fight fans are expecting too much of him at this time, and again reminded them that he was still in the early stages of learning the sweet science. It was written that Ed Too Tall Jones was hurt by the boos. Even his biggest supporters thought Jones was not a fighter and belonged in the football field. On November the 16th, 1979, it was announced Jones would have yet another fight. It was lined up for November the 20th. Jones was set to receive $20,000 plus a third of the gate. The fight was to take place in Arizona. But one day before the fight would be canceled due to a lack of public interest. If Jones was to stay in boxing, he could only ride off his football fame for so long. The WBC heavyweight champion of the world, Larry Holmes, had offered Jones a fight. But Jones knew that he could not defeat Larry Holmes and wanted to work his way into a fight with Larry Holmes. When former heavyweight champion of the world, Ali, was asked about Ed Too Tall Jones' chances as a fighter, Ali gave a one-word answer. Timber was the word that Ali used. Jones was making good money when he was in the NFL, and he would have to understand that the big paydays he was receiving in boxing would soon come to an end with lack of fan interest. But the excuse from Team Jones was that Arizona was the wrong location to sell the bout. They would take the show to Washington, D.C. On November the 23rd, there was a series of articles having to do with the sport of boxing and TV ratings. With Ali now retired, TV networks was looking for a new superstar in boxing. According to the article, at this time Sugar Ray Leonard and Larry Holmes was fighting on ABC. NBC was featuring WBA World Heavyweight Champion John Tate. In this particular article, there was a small mistake made by the newspaper that had Tate listed as the WBC Heavyweight Champion. Tate was actually the WBA champion and Larry Holmes was the WBC champion. The article criticized CBS for featuring Ed Too Tall Jones. They referred to CBS as sorry chaps for featuring Jones, and now the CBS network was under attack. It was written that they was featuring a circus act in Ed Too Tall Jones. So the new question was, how long will CBS continue to feature the fights of Ed Too Tall Jones? According to reports, Jones' debut did some of the year's biggest numbers for the sport of boxing, even though I can't find one copy of the fight anywhere. But after seeing Jones fight, the public was not as interested in seeing Jones as a fighter as they was during the build-up to his first fight. It appeared as though there was some kind of group effort in place to force the 28-year-old fighter back into the NFL. Jones, who was a media-friendly athlete, was now being attacked by the media. There would be a group effort by the media of that time period to make sure that Ed Too Tall Jones fights was the equivalent of some staged carnival. Many fight fans felt that if Jones was really serious about leaving football, that wrestling would have been a better sport for him to take up. This would come up in articles. For Jones' third fight, which took place on November the 24th, 1979, he would face a more dangerous opponent, or maybe I should say a more experienced opponent. This time he would be fighting former Mexican heavyweight champion of the world, Fernando Montez. Jones spoke to the media again before his third fight and said that he blocks out the criticisms and doesn't listen to the negative feedback. He again told the media that he is still learning how to fight. In Jones' third fight, he finally received what he wanted, which was a knockout. It came in the first round. It was a hard left jab followed by a series of right hands that would end the fight. Even though Jones will win by KO, he still received boos from the crowd. A frustrated Jones told the media that when he went 6 rounds, he was booed because the fight fans felt he should have stopped his opponent in the first round. Now that I get the first round knockout, the crowd is still booing me. I can't satisfy the critics. Jones will receive his $35,000 guarantee and continue his boxing career. It had been less than a month and Too Tall Jones already had 3 fights. But how could they keep the big checks coming in for Jones? The answer was to bring a fight to where Jones was the most popular. That would be Dallas. It's there that he participated in 3 Super Bowls and was a key part of the Doomsday Defense. Too Tall Jones would spend money out of his own pockets to make sure that the Dallas Cowboys would be in their house for his 4th pro fight. Jones' 4th pro fight was to take place on December 14th. The comparisons to Jess Willard and Primo Carnera would continue. Some writers believe that if Carnera could be built into a champion, then Jones could at least be built into a contender. There was a more important group of heavyweights being featured on a different card that was happening on December 14th of 1979. The card was taking place in Atlantic City. There was 3 young undefeated heavyweights being featured at Atlantic City. Those 3 heavyweights was Greg Page, Pinklon Thomas, and Jerry Coonan. Back in Dallas, Jones would earn another knockout victory defeating Jim Wallace. Jim Wallace was a heavyweight that had a losing record. The newspapers was reporting Wallace to have a record of 5-2, but the real record for Wallace was 2-3. Jones made sure the Dallas Cowboys was present, buying his former teammates tickets to the event. He admitted that he was nervous fighting in front of the Dallas Cowboys. He also had a chance to hear a cheering crowd rather than loud boos. The boos he did receive was from Cowboy fans that wanted him to come back to the Doomsday Defense. Jones said that he was going to take some time off. Jones had been fighting for a little over a month and was now 4-0. The Dallas Cowboys had made the playoffs but had struggled all year on the defensive end of the ball. Their talented quarterback Roger Staubach was able to win games running a reliable offense. Larry Bethea was the first player assigned to fill the cleats of Too Tall Jones. That didn't work out. Bethea was moved to defensive tackle. Jones' left end position would eventually be shared by Larry Cole and John Dutton. The Cowboys brought John Dutton in late, who was holding out on the Colts and eventually was traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Dutton had just recently moved to the left end position, but the Cowboys would lose in the playoffs facing the LA Rams. During this time period, Jones' teammates supported what Jones was doing, but wanted Jones to come back to the Dallas Cowboys. Jones was now much lighter than he was when he played for the Cowboys. He was weighing around 243 pounds. In his last NFL season, he was weighing as high as in the 270s. Jones was very close to his former teammates. He said every time they lose a game, it hurts. But going into the 1980s, boxing was still the main focus for Too Tall Jones. On January 6, 1980, it was announced that Jones' next fight would happen January 22nd. This next fight would happen at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. His opponent would be Billy Joe Thomas, who was fighting from out of Arkansas. Again, the newspapers was reporting the wrong record for Jones' opponent. It was being reported that Billy Joe Thomas had a record of 2-2, but his real record was 0-4. He would be featured alongside a 5-0 young super lightweight named Ray Mancini. During this time period, Jones and Mancini would become very good friends. According to the newspaper, Jones was showing Mancini what it was like to be a pro athlete, and Mancini was showing Jones what it was like to be a fighter. Both were trained by the same team. January 18th, promoters Curtis Taylor and Jake Buzz Henry did what promoters are expected to do and reported that ticket sales were going well. January the 19th, Jones appeared in front of the press with his new good friend Ray Boom Boom Mancini. He was now saying that he would one day win the world title and seemed to be focused on his boxing career. He said that he missed football and his teammates, but he didn't have any regrets and said that he had always wanted to give boxing a try and that boxing was actually a childhood dream. He gave a prediction for the upcoming Super Bowl between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Los Angeles Rams. Jones would correctly pick the Steelers to win the game. There was many fight fans that still believed Jones was boxing to eventually get more money from the Dallas Cowboys. But Jones had been in boxing for over a month and had already made $180,000. But Jones would not receive all the money and had to pay his team. It still was not a bad amount of money to make in the late 1970s to early 80s for a month's work. On the night of January the 22nd, Jones' next fight finally took place. The newspapers reported that Thomas ran throughout the 4 rounds he lasted. Jones would finally drop Thomas with a body shot. It was also reported that Jones had another fight scheduled for 4 days out. His next fight would take place in Mississippi. His opponent, Rocky Gonzalez, would be making his pro debut. Young fighter Ray Boom Boom Mancini would also be featured alongside Jones. Jones made $9,000 for defeating Billy Joe Thomas, but the paydays were smaller than when he had came into the gate. Jones told the media that he would like to have as many as 2 fights a month moving forward, or at least 1 fight every 3 weeks. He was still being criticized in the newspaper for having an amateurish skill set. According to the newspapers, Jones would miss haymakers and would completely turn around after missing punches. CBS was airing the fights, so it's somewhat mysterious to me that I cannot find these fights anywhere on the internet. It appears as though at some point CBS decided to part ways with Jones. With such a busy schedule and perhaps CBS no longer being interested, there was no way Jones was going to be able to keep making the kind of money that he had made coming into the sport. January 25th, 1980, one day before his scheduled fight with Rocky Gonzalez, it was announced that Jones would be returning to the Dallas Cowboys next season. After a fight with Gonzalez, he would complete some contract obligations and fight twice more. The 2 locations set would be Jacksonville and Atlanta. When the report hit the headlines, the Cowboys had not heard from Jones yet, but said that they had hoped the reports were true because they wanted Jones to return to the team. According to the newspaper articles, Jones told a source that he was with the Dallas Cowboys the week they played Washington and missed his teammates. He also said he missed the game of football. He said it was a 66-yard play from John Riggins that would take him over the top. He felt that Riggins would not have made that play if he was on the football field. Jones seemed somewhat confused regarding his future. Why all of a sudden the change of mind? On January 26, Jones stopped Rocky Gonzalez in 1 round. He reportedly made $10,000. Here's where the media of 1980 gets a little tricky. Right before the fight, Jones denied all reports that he was retiring from the sport of boxing. He again said that he would not be returning to the NFL. So could this be a little fake news from the media in the year of 1980? Who was this so-called source that he told he was retiring? Well, there was an unnamed Dallas radio talk show host that was covered in some articles, but was there some truth to this rumor? January 31st, a big turn of events in the life of Ed Too Tall Jones. Jones was arrested and jailed at around 9:30 a.m. that morning. He was being accused of rape. This would happen in Dallas, Texas. According to reports, Jones had been at a Dallas nightclub celebrating a doctor's birthday along with 2 nurses. One of the 2 women said that she and her roommate, along with Jones and the doctor, arrived at her apartment around 1:00 a.m. The doctor would leave shortly after they arrived. Other reports had the doctor going straight home and never going back to the apartment. According to the woman, Jones stayed at her apartment and was talking to her roommate when she shut her door and went to bed. The woman said that she woke up around 2:30 a.m. and found Jones on top of her, attempting to rape her. According to reports, she woke up and Jones got off of her and threw the covers over her and walked out of her bedroom. Other articles reported more details than some. It was being reported in some articles that the woman that Jones was with was actually his girlfriend. So it was Jones' girlfriend's roommate that was making the accusation. Some of the articles did fail to report those important details. However, Jones now had some serious accusations on his hands. When law enforcement arrived at the apartment, Jones' girlfriend led law enforcement to where Jones was sleeping. The friend of Jones told law enforcement that Jones was sleeping with her in her room and had left the room twice, and she was not sure where he had went. Jones would be in court right away and was denying all allegations. February 2nd, just a few days after being accused of rape, the 25-year-old accuser said she was dropping the charge because she could not go through with the emotional trauma and the publicity of the trial. She was now saying that Mr. Jones was a nice man and that she did not want to do anything to hurt his career. Well, my take or question would be, if he really did rape this woman, how could she be telling the media that he's a nice man? She concluded by telling the media that she was still raped, but she was dropping the charges due to personal reasons. Jones continued to deny all allegations. The story does indeed sound strange to me. I try to keep my personal thoughts out of the time machine as much as possible, but I believe he was set up and the woman knew that she was not telling the truth and lacked what it took to carry out her lie. And Jones should be glad she did that. But I personally believe that any woman that could have a guy locked up for a false allegation of rape should do some serious time behind bars. But this story was swept under the rug along with the boxing career of Ed Too Tall Jones, in which there is no available video footage that I could find. By the summer of 1980, it was announced that Ed Too Tall Jones may return to the Dallas Cowboys. As of June 1980, there was not anything in writing yet. One thing that was different about Jones is that at one point he was 30 pounds smaller than he was when he retired. But Jones had recently started lifting weights again and had bulked back up to 255. Jones said that he was in the best shape of his life going into the 1980 NFL football season. At the end of July, it was announced that Ed Too Tall Jones was once again a Dallas Cowboy. Most of the articles were focused on his transition from boxing back to football. They would totally leave out the rape allegations, which I thought was very good. In the media, it was nearly like the rape allegations never took place. Ed Too Tall Jones will return to the Cowboys and once again had a major role on the defensive side of the ball, returning to defensive end in top form. His professional boxing career lasted less than 3 months. He retired 6-0 with 5 knockouts. I still do not have an answer as to why there is no footage on these fights, especially considering CBS was airing his fights. In 1979 and 1980, I resided in the UK, and the Jones fights were not aired in the UK. If anyone has any idea on where I can find or view the fights of Ed Too Tall Jones, leave me some information in the comment section. Also leave a comment. Tell me what you think of the boxing career of Ed Too Tall Jones or the rape allegations. And please rate my video. Thanks for watching.